Since a very young age, I've had an obsession with tractors. In nearly every photograph of me, I'm either playing with one, sitting on one, or wearing something in John Deere green, Farmall red, or Ford blue. And I don't just mean childhood photographs, I'm talking about to this very day. After I graduated college and got a real job, I bought a decent camera and started photographing old tractors on the weekends, and I particularly like to photograph them in their natural state of decay, slowly rusting away in a patch of overgrown switchgrass. On this particular Saturday, I had been driving aimlessly through a nearby rural county, keeping my eyes peeled for an old tractor. It was a dry summer day and I was getting thirsty, and as I crossed a set of railroad tracks, I saw one of those bait and tackle gas stations with the old pumps with the rolling numerical display. I was wearing a t-shirt with a picture of a 1947 Ford 8N on the front. And when I went inside the store, the man at the register said, "Hey, I've seen a tractor just like that out by the old cemetery." I couldn't believe my luck, and the man even drew me a little map on the back of my receipt. He didn't know the exact address, but he said once I passed the cemetery, I couldn't miss it because it was the first house on the right after the paved road ended. I thanked the man and headed off down the road. It was a lot farther than I expected, and I was just about to turn back when I saw the old cemetery up ahead. After another mile or so, the paved road turned into a dirt road. My little car was rattling and bouncing all over the place, and I was thinking, this is a bad idea. But then I saw a little house up ahead on the right. It was the first house on the dirt road, so I slowly pulled into the driveway, scanning the property for a Ford 8N. The man at the gas station had made it sound like it was sitting right at the edge of the road, but all I saw was a bare spot where the grass was dead. Was I too late? Had they gotten rid of it? I sat scanning the property for a few moments, then glanced in the rearview mirror and was startled to see a woman, maybe late 40s, standing right behind my car. She had a large black sheepdog with her, and she walked over to my driver's side window. I let down the window, but before I could speak, she asked me what I was doing there, and informed me that I was on private property. I apologized and pointed to my shirt, and told her that I photographed old tractors, and that the guy at the gas station had told me there was a tractor, just like this one, out this way. She softened a little bit and told her dog to sit. She said her name was Karen, and that the tractor had belonged to her husband, who had died recently. The cost of the funeral had just about wiped her out, so when someone knocked on her door and offered her $2,000 for it, she had to let it go. I told her I was sorry to hear that, and she apologized that I had driven all this way for nothing. I told her it was no big deal, and waved at her and the dog as I backed out of her driveway. As I started to pull away, Karen stopped me and said, "Hey, I just remembered the Perkins farm at the end of this road. They have some kind of old green tractor from the 1920s, I believe. And I'm sure they wouldn't mind you taking pictures," Karen added. "Although you might want to park your car here and walk the rest of the way. That road gets pretty rough, and I don't know if your little car can handle it." I chuckled. "You don't mind if I park here?" "Not at all. Me and Rusty will take good care of her, won't we, boy?" Karen said as she scratched the dog behind the ears. I thanked Karen for the tip and grabbed my camera from my car. I had walked down the dirt road about a mile when it started raining. There was a dead end up ahead, so I figured it couldn't be much farther. I passed a few rows of corn on the right side of the road, and then stopped at the old, dilapidated farmhouse with a wraparound porch on the left. As I made my way up the driveway, I thought I heard a phone ringing from the house, and then something caught my attention out of the corner of my eye. There was an old wooden barn to the right, and just inside the barn sat a tractor. "Is that what I think it is?" I said to myself. No, it couldn't be, I thought as I walked closer. I couldn't believe my eyes. There she was, my holy grail, a 1924 John Deere Spoker D tractor. A restored version had sold at auction a few years ago for $200,000. This one was perfectly unrestored, covered in grease and dust, just like it should be. I stepped inside the barn and started to unzip my camera bag, but then I decided I should probably go up to the house and introduce myself first. Country folks are very hospitable, but they don't take kindly to strangers snooping around and photographing their property unannounced. As I turned to leave, I collided with a man with a toothless grin in blue jean overalls, standing right behind me. I stumbled back and he raised something above his head. By the time I realized it was a tire iron, and before I could protest, I was struck across the side of the head and knocked unconscious. Sometime later, I couldn't tell you how long, I awoke in a dark and dingy concrete block basement. I was lying on a grimy old hospital cot behind a row of iron bars. Above the cot was a transom window that seemed to be underneath the porch and let in only the faintest light. There was another cell joined to mine, both padlocked from the outside, separated by an iron bar door in the center. I noticed this door was not padlocked, only bolt-latched from my side. Outside of the cells was a sort of laundry room with a sink, a mirror, an old fridge, and a buzzing fluorescent light. At the back of the room, there was a doorway that led to a set of stairs that went up to the house above. What the heck is this place? I thought as I tried to sit up. A jolt of the worst pain I had ever experienced shot up my right leg all the way up to my eyeballs. I winced and instinctively reached out with both hands to massage the pain away, but there was nothing there but a stub. My right leg was gone mid-thigh. I panicked. Oh God, what the hell happened to my leg? I tried to take a deep breath and think of a rational explanation, but there was none. The end of my severed leg was a raw pink, crusted with dried blood where the skin had been sewn together. I tried to slow my breathing. I was going into shock. I started to vomit, but nothing came out. I sobbed, "No, God, no," and dry heaved over and over. After one particularly loud heave, I heard a low groaning from the other cell. It didn't sound human, and I thought, what else is in here with me? I rolled over to try to sit up, and the beast in the other cell stirred and began to breathe heavily. A dark figure stood up on two legs, and I could tell that it was giant, maybe 7 feet tall. It lumbered over to the cell divider, grunting as it appeared to try to squeeze its giant head through the bars. Then it stretched an arm through and felt furiously for the latch. Oh God, please don't let it know how to open that door, I prayed, but the latch squeaked as it lifted free and the iron door creaked open. The beast lunged through the door and towards me all in one quick motion, and it seized me with its giant arms and lifted me off the cot and into the air with ease. I felt its hot, wet breath on the back of my neck as it pulled me tight and snorted like a giant bear. There was a wet smacking noise and sharp exhale as it opened its mouth, and I braced for the beast to sink its teeth into my throat, but instead it spoke, or at least tried to speak. It kept saying "fen, fen, fen" over and over, and as it pulled back to look at me, I could see in its wet mouth a black lump where a tongue should have been, and it was making the sound with just its front teeth pressing against its bottom lip. It pulled me close and squeezed again, and I realized it was not trying to hurt me. It was hugging me. "Fen, fen," it said again, and then I understood what it was trying to say. "Friend, that's right, I'm your friend," I replied. "Fen, fen," it continued as it jumped up and down. Jolts of pain ran through my leg with every bounce. "Easy, friend," I groaned. The beast set me down on the cot gently and pointed at my leg and asked, "Hut, hut?" "Yes, hurt, it hurts, buddy, that's right," I replied. The beast sat down next to me, and I finally saw its face more clearly in the dim light. It was a young man, maybe early 20s, I couldn't say for sure. "I hut," he said, as he pointed to where his tongue used to be. Now I noticed that his septum was pierced with a large steel nose ring, and the top of his head was bald and sunk in the middle as if the whole top of his skull was missing. There was a faint scar in the middle of the sunken part, and I shuddered to think what horrible things had been done to him. He pointed to his chest and said, "Etch." and I understood he was telling me his name was Etch, or at least something that sounded like that. I pointed to my own chest and said, Rob. Etch pointed at me and said, Wob, Wob, and then pointed back to himself and said, Etch, Etch, and then clapped his hands together in amusement. Suddenly, the door at the top of the stairs creaked open. A man's voice called down, Get back in your cage, you awful wretch. Etch jumped up from the cot like he had heard a ghost and rushed back through the cell divider as fast as he had come through it. He closed the latch through the bars, but again, it made a loud squeaking sound. I sat there shivering with anxious dread. The stairs were obscured and I couldn't yet see who was coming down them. I caught my reflection in the mirror at the back of the room and noticed I had a full beard and my face looked sallow and pale. How long have I been here? I thought to myself. The man growled. I told you never to touch that lock again, didn't I? A figure stepped off the bottom step and into the room, and I could see it was the same man that had hit me over the head with the tire iron. He walked to Etch's cell, gripped the bars, and demanded, Answer me, jackass. Etch whined. You just lost meal privileges for 1 week, the man said, and then Etch squealed in pain. And you, the man spat as he turned and pointed at me. You're going to learn how to behave real quick, aren't you? He asked as he approached my cell. He then grabbed the cell bars and pressed his face into them, staring straight through me, his eyes burning with hostility. Or do you need me to teach you a lesson right now that you'll never forget? He added. No, sir, I replied in a quivering voice. That's good, 1 jackass is all I can handle, the man said as he turned and glared at Etch, who honked, Hee-haw. The man then walked to the sink, reached inside and rinsed off a bowl, a saucer and spoon and sat them on a tray on the table. Then he opened the fridge and pulled out 2 large metal stew pots. There was a serving spoon in one of the pots and he used it to scoop out some rice from the first pot and then slapped it on the saucer. Then he spooned something thick and viscous from the other pot into the bowl. He returned the pots to the fridge and then carried the tray to my cell and slid it under the cell door. You eat twice a day, the man said, and if you act like a jackass, you don't eat at all. Etch whined, but I replied, Yes, sir. From now on, call me Pa, he said. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Pa, I replied. Good, good, Pa said gravely, as he eyeballed me and made a sucking sound with his tongue pressed to his teeth. That's in that bowl right there is Ma's famous gravy pot pie, Pa boasted. I nodded my head, and Pa reached in his pocket and pulled out a single white pill and dropped it through the bars and onto the tray below. You'll need that for the pain, Pa said. It'll let you sleep. Thanks, I said blankly, and Pa narrowed his eyes as if he wasn't sure if I was being sarcastic or not. This man was looking for any excuse for violence, so I just repeated thanks meekly, and he turned and headed back to the stairs. He put 1 foot on the stairs and 1 hand on the railing and said, You're going to want some rest, because tomorrow's a big day. Then he turned one last time to Etch, and I don't want to hear any whining from you tonight because your belly hurts, you awful wretch. Etch moaned resignedly as Pa climbed the stairs and shut the door behind him. A million thoughts ran through my mind as I thought what Pa might have meant by big day. He cut off my leg, presumably, to keep me from escaping, but why do they want to keep me here? I quickly decided that it was of no use to agonize over what that maniac's intentions might be, and that I should instead focus on ways to escape. I also decided I should try to eat something. If I was to get out of this god-awful place, I needed my strength. I stood on my good leg and hopped the few feet to the tray of food, and then used the cell bars to lower myself down to a sitting position. The rice was somehow both dry and gummy looking, and the contents of the bowl appeared to be a dark, thick gravy with a mushed-together lump of soggy white bread floating in it. I sniffed the bowl and gagged. It smelled gamey like wild hog. Etch whined a little. He must have smelled the food, but I couldn't imagine anyone wanting to eat such putrid slop. Etch, do you want the... Before I could finish, Etch had flown across his cell and was pressing his face against the dividing bars with one hand stuck through them, grasping at air. I scooted across the floor and pulled the tray along beside me. I set the bowl of slop with the spoon on the floor, and Etch reached his other arm through the bars and picked up the bowl with one hand and started spooning the gravy into his mouth between the bars with his other hand. When he had finished most of the gravy, he carefully balanced the mushy clump of bread on the spoon and shoved that into his mouth. He chewed a few times, swallowed, and then burped loudly. He tried to pour the remains of the bowl into his mouth through the bars, but most of it ended up on his chin. With his giant fingers, he scraped the bottom and sides of the bowl, then used his lips to hoover the remains off his fingers. "Slow down, friend," I said as I shoveled a handful of rice into my mouth. Etch left the bowl and went back to his cot and began snoring almost immediately. I finished the rice and put the bowl back on the tray, then scooted back over to the door. I remembered the pill, so I shoved it in my shorts pocket and noticed that my keys were missing. That's strange, I thought. Then I pushed the tray underneath the door into the open room. I stared at the gap under the door. It was only tall enough for the tray and shallow bowl to fit through, so there was no way I was going to squeeze underneath it. I looked up to see if there was any way over the bars, but they were bracketed to the floor joists of whatever room was above the basement. I thought of the transom window, but even standing on the cot, I would barely be able to reach it. I scanned my cell for something to stand on. In the corner, there was a 2-gallon bucket with the word toilet painted on it. With some difficulty, I got the bucket to the cot and used the windowsill to pull myself up onto it. I was then able to unlatch the bottom of the window and flip it open, but there was no mechanism to hold it up, so it just flipped back shut. Luckily, there was no screen on the window to fool with, but I was going to need something taller to stand on or someone tall to push me through. I turned a bit to look at Etch. I could see his giant chest heaving up and down. I whispered, "Etch," but he just kept snoring. I leaned further out and whispered his name again, but lost my balance and came crashing down to the bed, directly onto my severed leg. The wave of pain was so intense that I almost passed out. I hurriedly fished out the pill from my pocket, jammed it in my mouth, and swallowed. Slowly, the pain started to subside and I drifted off to sleep. When I came to, the sun was just coming up through the window and I realized I had pissed myself. Luckily, my wound seemed dry, so I rolled over to a sitting position and pushed myself up off the cot and flipped the mattress over and was glad to see it wasn't soaked through. I heard a soft voice behind me. "Mr. Ruggles wets the bed too." I whipped my head around to see a young girl dressed in a white gown standing outside my cell door. Her hair was long and silvery blonde, almost white, and her eyes were such a piercing blue that it was uncanny. She was holding a talking teddy bear known as Mr. Ruggles. It was a cheap knockoff of another talking teddy bear that was popular at the time. When she pressed its paw, it spoke in a mechanical voice, "Will you be my friend?" I sat down on the cot in stunned silence. "Don't be wooed," the girl said. "Mr. Ruggles asked you a question." "Oh yes, of course I'll be your friend, Mr. Ruggles," I replied. The girl giggled and then sat down cross-legged on the floor in front of my cell and began grooming the bear with her hand. He always knows the right thing to say. "Pa says one day I'll have a wheel friend just like Mr. Ruggles," the girl said as she giggled again. I asked the girl, "What's your name?" She replied, "Angel Grace Divine, of course," as if she thought I was pretending not to know her name. Angel went on to tell me that Etch used to be her brother, but he said bad words and had bad thoughts, so he couldn't live upstairs anymore, and now everyone calls him Awful Etch. The kid was creepy, but I told myself it wasn't her fault. I had already met Pa, and if Ma was half as twisted, the girl didn't have a chance. Angel pointed to my severed leg and laughed. "Just like Mr. Ruggles." And then she pointed to the bear's foot. For some reason, the unexpected dark humor made me laugh. "Yep, just like Mr. Ruggles." Unfortunately, I didn't have to wait long to meet Ma. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open, and heavy feet descended as a woman's voice called out, "Angel Grace Divine, are you down there? I told you it wasn't ready." Angel jumped to her feet and ran to hug Ma as she stepped into the room. "I'm so happy, Mama. I have a real friend to talk to." Ma knelt on the ground so that she was at eye level with Angel. "I'm glad you're happy, dear. Now run upstairs. Sister Sarah made you a big breakfast and you don't want it to get cold." Angel kissed Ma and flew up the stairs, and I heard her feet patter across the floor somewhere above Etch's cell, where he was still snoring loudly. Ma glared at me as she struggled to stand. She was a large, sturdy woman, and she reached into her massive bosom and pulled out a silver whistle, like a gym coach would carry, and put it to her lips. She waddled over to Etch's cell and blew the whistle right at his head. Etch fell out of his cot and onto the floor as Ma yelled, "Rise and shine, you awful wretch!" Ma told Etch that his punishment had been lifted, not because he didn't deserve it, but because she needed him to carry in the hogs for her to slaughter, and that he'd need to eat a good breakfast so he'd be up to the task. Etch squealed with delight as Ma turned back to the stairs. "Sarah will be down with food once our Angel is done with hers," she said as she stomped back up the stairs. Half an hour or so later, Sarah came down with 2 plates of food. She slid one plate into Etch's cell and then the other into mine. She then rinsed 2 glasses from the sink, filled them with water from the faucet, and placed them on the floor through our cell bars. Sarah was in her early 20s with mousy brown hair, and she was a little hunched over at the shoulders, like she had already lived a hard life. She wouldn't look at me directly, but she asked softly if there was anything that I needed. I told her that I could use something to clean my leg with. She glanced at my leg, then folded her hands and bowed towards me. "You don't know how lucky you are to be chosen to serve the little Angel. Ma says it will be a great honor for me to nurse you through this transition. I'll be down after supper tonight to clean you." And then she fled back up the stairs. Transition? Transition? I contemplated nervously. I felt a twinge of pity for myself as I looked down at my grotesque leg. I couldn't have imagined how much more grotesque I would become in the next few days. I got down on the floor and scooted over to the plate of food. It was the half-eaten remains of what had been a hearty breakfast. A nibbled buttermilk biscuit, 2 halves of bacon sticking out of a pile of congealed picked-over grits, a piece of sausage with a bite taken out of it, and scrambled eggs covered in dried ketchup. I didn't care. I scarfed it down so fast I even beat Etch. About an hour later, Ma came down again, this time with keys and a lead rope, and she told Etch to stick his nose through the bars. She clipped the rope to his nose ring and then unlocked the cell and manipulated the rope as he walked out, and stood obediently by her side. Ma closed the cell door and squeezed the padlock back together, but I noticed I didn't hear a click, and then she led Etch up the stairs and I heard both their heavy feet above as they walked somewhere towards the back of the house. Soon after, Pa came down and stood at my cell door. He flicked another white pill at me and it bounced off my stomach and into my lap. "I'm going to need you to swallow that," Pa said, deadly serious. I put my hands up. "Look, I wasn't trying to steal anything from you guys. I just wanted to take a picture of your tractor. That's it. Please just let me go. You'll never hear from me again." A smile grew on Pa's face. "Oh, I know you wasn't stealing nothing. You were sent here, son, to serve the Angel of the Lord." My bottom lip quivered. "The Angel of the Lord?" I asked. Pa replied solemnly, "You've already had the honor to meet our Angel Grace. She's our heavenly blessing. Every word she speaks are the Lord's words, and her wants are his wants." "What do they want with me?" I asked, terrified of what the answer might be. Pa gently lifted the tarnished cross necklace that was around his neck up to his crusty lips and kissed it. "Once that pill kicks in, we'll get busy fixing your other leg," he said, and then walked to the stairs. "Sister Sarah used to work in a hospital. She's the best stitcher-upper I've ever seen, so I expect your recovery to be real quick." The room started spinning, and I felt sick again. "Now hurry up and take that pill. It takes about 10 minutes to knock you out," Pa said. "I don't want you making a big fuss when I come to carry you out of here. I don't think you can take too many more knocks on the head." I was in full-on terror mode. As soon as I heard Pa shut the door at the top of the stairs, I hopped off the cot and over to the cell divider door as fast as I could. I flipped open the noisy latch and pushed open the creaky door, then hopped through Etch's cell to where I could reach through the bars to grab the padlock. I closed my eyes and prayed that what I had suspected was true, and Ma hadn't fully engaged the lock. I gave it a swift tug and the lock pulled open. Thank God, I thought. But now how do I get the heck out of here? I pushed open the cell door and hopped over to the stairs. I grabbed the railing with both hands and used it to help me hop up the stairs to the door as quietly as I could. I eased the door open and could hear several voices talking in the room to my right, which I guessed was the kitchen. I came through the door a little further, so I could look to my left, where I guessed the front door would be, and to my delight it was. I heard the sound of a mixer from the kitchen, and I thanked my lucky stars as it masked the sound as I closed the basement door, and then the sound as I hopped across the empty living room and opened the front door. I hopped over the threshold and onto the porch and heard a crunch as the wooden porch slats gave way. I didn't break all the way through, but I lost my balance and fell forward with a heavy thud. I reached for the porch railing to pull myself up, then slowly hobbled my way down the steps and across the front yard. I noticed my car parked in the dirt road circle. How the heck did that get here? I thought, and then I felt a tiny bit of hope. What if my keys were in the car? It was wishful thinking, perhaps, but I knew I wasn't going to be able to hop down the road the mile or so to Karen's house before someone realized I was gone and came looking. I fell against the driver's side of the car and peered desperately in the window. It was a sight for sore eyes. The keys were dangling from the ignition. My luck was changing. The key fob had been removed for some reason, but the keys were right there. I lifted the handle, but the door was locked. I worked my way around to the driver's side door, and it was locked too. Damn it, I said under my breath. Then I looked around for a large rock that I could use to break the window. I saw one that would work, so I hopped over to get it, but just as I got about 10 feet from the rock, I lost my balance and fell flat on my face. The fall broke my nose and my eyes began to water. Then it felt like my sinuses were full of lava. On top of that, a rush of pain surged through my lower body where my stub had smacked the ground. But the pain was not going to stop me. I began crawling frantically on my hands and good leg, and as I started to reach for the rock, I felt something bite into my leg and pull me backwards. I screamed in pain as I looked over my shoulder and saw Pa. His eyes furious and his face splattered with blood. He had sunk a brush hook deep into the knee pit of my good leg. Pa stomped down on my calf with his heavy boot to dislodge the hook, and then he flipped the brush hook around and smashed the handle down into the back of my head. After a couple of sharp blows, everything went dark. When I came to, I was lying on a slaughtering table somewhere at the back of the house. Sarah was at the end of the table joyfully cleaning my good leg and singing, "He's got the whole world in his hands." Ma was tightening a ratchet strap around my waist and the table. Pa was placing a breathing mask over my mouth as I wearily tried to sit up. "Get another strap around his chest, Ma," Pa insisted. Ma shot back annoyed. "Just hold him down," as she pulled a giant cleaver from the wall. Sarah stared into my eyes adoringly and continued singing, "He's got you and me, brother, in his hands." I pleaded with Ma, "Please don't, please just stop. I'll do anything you ask, but please, please, not this. Please, lady, just please stop." "Grab him now," Ma ordered, and Pa swung his forearm across my neck and choked me down to the table. Ma sunk the cleaver into my left leg just above the knee. Pa's arm was pressed so firmly on my throat that I couldn't breathe, which meant I also couldn't scream. The pain was unbearable. My eyes bulged and it felt like they were going to explode out of my head. Ma slammed the cleaver down 2 more times before I felt my leg completely detach. The last thing I remember was hearing Ma scold me for squirting blood on her as I slipped back into unconsciousness. The next time I woke up, I was back in my cell. I felt feverish and my head was foggy. I reached down and confirmed the inevitable. My left leg was gone too. I looked through the cell bars and Pa was there staring down at me. Don't worry now, I didn't let it go to waste. I fed that little stick of a leg to my new hog. Gonna fatten up real nice by the time we're done with you. Why are you doing this to me? I begged wearily. This is what the Lord wants, Pa replied. The Lord? I asked, confused. What the angel wants is what the Lord wants. I already told you this, Pa added bitterly. Now, our friend here is going to come in there to check the stitches on your face and legs and give you a shot for the infection, Pa continued as he looked back at a lady standing at the table, filling a syringe with her back to me. I didn't expect you'd be so delicate. You must be a city boy, Pa said as he opened the cell door for the woman to enter. I recognized her immediately. It was Karen, the woman whose house I had gone to the day all this awful mess started. Remember me? Karen asked almost cheerfully. I nodded quietly. We've been trying to find a permanent companion for our little angel for a year now. Tried tricking people into coming out to the house, even thought about grabbing some homeless fella from the city. Then like a miracle, you just show up in my driveway, and the only enticing you needed was just some old tractor. She laughed. The Lord always provides a way, Sister Karen, Pa added, and they both agreed. Karen stuck me with the needle and then cleaned my face with alcohol. It felt like my face was on fire, but I tried not to show any pain. His face is actually healing up pretty nice. Sarah did a good job stitching the lip to the nose, Karen praised. I think you may have overstuffed these cheeks, though. You used the fat from the thigh like I told you, right? Pa was standing just inside the cell, leaning back against the bars. Nah, we used that rear cheek meat, he said with a sarcastic chuckle. They both laughed, and Karen applied some kind of ointment to my face, and then she did the same routine for my legs. There, she declared, apparently satisfied with herself. I think a couple of days rest and he'll be right as rain. Pa and Karen went back upstairs and I struggled to sit up. I wanted to try to see myself in the mirror. Etch was peeking out from under his covers at me, but when I looked over at him, he pulled the covers up tight over his head. I turned to the mirror and recoiled at my own reflection. The bridge and tip of my nose was gone so that it laid wider and nearly flat. My upper lip had been split along the philtrum and sewn back together to join with the nose so that it looked like an animal's snout. My cheeks looked like they were about to burst. They had been sewn into two distinct round circles that were cartoonishly puffy, giving me a permanent foolish grin. I lost it and began sobbing uncontrollably, the salt from my tears burning as they rolled down my face. I heard the latch squeak as Etch entered my cell. He approached shyly and then sat down beside me on the cot. Etch tried to comfort me by petting the top of my head, then exhaustion overtook me and I drifted off to sleep. I was startled awake by Pa's voice. I told you if you ever touched that lock again, there'd be hell to pay. Etch had fallen asleep beside me, but he jumped up at the sound of Pa. Pa was holding his tire iron with one hand and fumbling in his pocket for the key to the cell with his other hand. Etch started to retreat to his cell, but Pa yelled at him to grab the bars. Etch obeyed, and as he held onto the bars, Pa belted him across the back at least 20 times with the tire iron. Etch yelped like a dog each time as he slowly lost his will and slid to the ground. Pa started to hit him again, but I yelled, "Leave him alone, you stupid bastard," and launched myself at his feet. I didn't even feel any pain as I tried to pull him to the ground. Pa swung the tire iron at me, and I hid my head so that he hit my back and shoulders. "Help me, Etch," I pleaded. Etch moved, perhaps just to return to his cell. But Pa swung down and hit him right on the dented part of his head. Etch appeared to glitch for a moment. Then his eyes filled with rage, and he glared up at Pa. Pa growled at me. "You lose your tongue for saying words like that in my house." He threw the tire iron aside, then reached in his overalls and pulled out an old pocket knife. He sat on me with his knee in my chest and reached in my mouth with his greasy fingers, and I tasted salt and metal. Etch stood and yelled, "Oh, more hurt! Get back to your bed right now, you awful wretch!" Pa snarled, and he warned me not to bite him or else. "Oh, more hurt!" Etch yelled again as he stomped his foot on the ground. I could see in his eyes the defiance that must have originally got him in trouble return. Some part of his old self had survived and awoken. Paw rose and slashed at Etch with the knife, but Etch grabbed his forearm and snapped it clean in half like a twig. Paw squealed in pain and staggered back against the cell bars. Etch grabbed Paw by his ears and slammed his head into the bars with a thick crunch. Paw screamed over and over, but Etch continued pressing his head into the bars with all of his strength. I heard a wet pop. Then Paw's tiny brain squirted out through the bars and flopped onto the floor outside the cell. Etch tossed Paw's lifeless body aside, then turned to me and pointed to the window above my head. Etch easily lifted me up to the window, which I opened, and then he started to push me through. I heard the basement door open with a bang, and Ma yelled down hysterically, "Paw! What's going on down there? Paw!" I heard the heavy thumps as she tramped down the stairs as fast as she could. I wriggled through the window until I was lying on the ground beneath the porch, and then turned and pushed up the window so Etch could climb through. I saw Ma enter the room with a 12-gauge shotgun in her hand. She screamed, "Oh God, no, what have you done?" Etch fit his head and arms through the window. I tried to pull him through, but he just wasn't going to fit. There was a loud blast, and Etch shrieked in pain as he fell away from the window and back into the cell. Ma moved forward, and all I saw was a bright flash of light and a mist of red as she unloaded into Etch again. My ears were ringing and the sound was muffled, but I heard Ma shout, "Karen, Sarah! Mr. Ruggles is getting away!" as she climbed the stairs back to the house. I was lying underneath the porch directly below the front door. I remembered the slats I had broken, so I crawled to the right a couple of feet. I had the thought that Ma would burst out of the front door, then fall through the porch and hit her head on the floorboards, or at least be stunned enough that I could get the gun away from her. To my dismay, Ma exited through a side door and began making her way around the porch to the front steps. I crawled as quietly as I could toward the steps. It was only a few feet, so I reached them before Ma did. She stepped heavily down the first step as she called out, "Where are you, demon?" As she started to descend to the second step, I grabbed both her ankles. Ma shrieked as she fell face first into the heavy stones that formed the walkway. She made a wet choking noise and then went silent. I pulled myself over to Ma and pried the shotgun from her hands. I rolled over onto my back and sat up just as Karen came through the front door with a syringe full of something in her hand. She too called out, "Demon Day!" but was cut off by surprise as she fell through the broken porch slats. She stood there stunned for a moment, just her head and shoulders visible above the porch. She started to speak again, "Demon D..." But this time I cut her off as I blasted her with the shotgun. I hit her right between the eyes and her head exploded through the open door and into the house. Paul may have thought I was just a city boy, but I spent many summers working on my uncle's farm and I was dead-eye with a shotgun. My mind went back to that first day I pulled up to the house and thought I had heard a phone ringing. It dawned on me that Karen had called ahead to tell Ma and Pa that I was on the way. I rolled back onto my stomach and pulled the gun and myself up the steps and onto the porch. Since the front door was a bloody mess, I crawled around the porch to the door that Ma had come out of. The door was wide open, and I could see that it led to some kind of large pantry, and then beyond that was the kitchen. I crawled through the pantry and heard Angel and Sarah singing together from the kitchen. I crawled just inside the doorway, propped myself up against the wall, and pointed the shotgun at them. They were on the other side of the kitchen and hadn't noticed me yet. Angel was sitting on the counter to the left of the stove, and Sarah was stirring something in a pot. I noticed the house phone to the right of the stove. I cleared my throat, and they both turned and looked at me in shock. Sarah grabbed a knife and started to move towards me. "Don't you move," I said as I aimed towards Angel. Sarah froze and laid the knife on the kitchen table. I glared at Sarah. "I want you to very calmly walk over to that phone and call 911, and I don't want you to hang up until they get here." Sarah nodded her head and reluctantly picked up the phone and started dialing. "If you move away from that phone, I'll send your precious Angel back to heaven." Oh, and be sure to tell them there's at least 4 dead, maybe more," I added coldly. I heard the 911 operator answer, and Sarah repeated what I had told her to say. I looked over at Angel, and she was staring at me like I was pure evil. She didn't seem scared, though, only angry as she screamed in a shrill voice over and over and louder, "Mr. Ruggles is very, very bad." She wouldn't stop, and I couldn't stand to hear her petulant voice anymore. I made a mental calculation. 3 shots taken, that leaves 2 more. I blasted the pot on the stove, and hot gravy pot pie exploded all over Angel and Sarah. They both screamed, but neither moved from where they were. "Let's everyone be very, very quiet," I said calmly. 30 minutes or so passed before the paramedics showed up, and then another 15 minutes before the police did. I was placed in cuffs and sat in the back of one of the squad cars until the cops could sort out the mess inside. I saw them put a handcuffed Sarah in the car behind me. Sarah would later corroborate my entire story, though she said that she had also been held against her will and only ever provided aid and comfort to Etch and I, and never participated in any mutilation. I couldn't provide any details of specific harm she had done to me, and apparently Angel only spoke glowingly of her when she was questioned. I didn't much care what happened to Sarah, but I'd soon have to drink myself to sleep each night trying to forget Ma and Pa. After many long years and several grueling procedures, my surgeon was able to give me a new face. I no longer recognized myself in the mirror, but at least kids no longer ran away from me in fear. I was donated a modified car to allow me to drive with just my hands, but for years I barely left the house. One Saturday night when I was feeling particularly restless, I got the urge to get out and see a movie. I got to the theater and rolled myself across the parking lot and scanned the marquee to see if there was anything I could stand watching. The third movie listed sent chills up my spine. A Mr. Ruggles movie? After all this time, they made a movie about that stupid knockoff bear? A theater employee in a full bear costume came out and started talking to people as they made their way to the theater. "Mr. Ruggles loves his snuggles," he declared gregariously. There was a pounding in my ears as my anxiety swelled. I bought a ticket to the first movie I saw, not named Mr. Ruggles, then got myself a popcorn and soda, and was eventually able to relax and enjoy the movie. When it was over, I waited for everyone else to leave the theater, and then I made my way out. As I rolled past the ticket taker and down the corridor, I passed a beautiful blonde nurse pushing a woman in a wheelchair. I noticed the nurse's ID badge was from St. Mary's Hospital, and it read Angie. I continued to stare at the pair. There was something familiar about the woman in the wheelchair. Had I seen her at some rehab or therapy session? Her arms were amputated above the elbow, and it appeared as though her legs had been removed mid-thigh like my own. But in their place were prosthetic legs that were garishly doll-like. Her face was badly disfigured. There were poorly healed round patches on her cheeks. Her nose was flattened, and her lips and eyelids had been removed. She was blind. Solid brown glass eyes with no pupils sat deep in her eye sockets. I shuddered inside. This woman barely resembled a human being, but all of a sudden I was certain that it was Sister Sarah. I wheeled my chair around and watched as the nurse pushed Sarah a little further where they stopped to have their tickets torn. The nurse then pushed Sarah to the theater just past the ticket taker, and I glanced at the marquee above them that read Mr. Ruggles. The nurse bent down towards Sarah so that they were eye to eye. "Mr. Ruggles loves his snuggles," she sang, and then rubbed her nose against Sarah's raw nose. Sarah flinched back in pain, but the nurse grabbed her under the chin and pulled her closer. "How many times do I have to tell you not to flinch, you awful wretch?" the nurse asked. Then she touched her own nose. "And look, you got blood on me." "Ugh, now I've got to find a bathroom," she added. The nurse left Sarah sitting there alone as she stormed off down the hallway. If it was truly Sarah, I had no doubt who that nurse was. My entire body began to tremble, then Sarah turned slowly and met my gaze as if she had perceived that I was staring at her. I knew she couldn't actually see me, but I swear those dead glass eyes looked straight into my own. and it felt as though the floor dropped out from under me. I grabbed the arms of my wheelchair and squeezed them tight until the feeling passed. The nurse came back and snapped her fingers in Sarah's face to get her attention, but Sarah didn't turn her head. The nurse looked in the direction that Sarah was pointed. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and a strange smile spread across her face. I quickly swiveled my chair and rolled out of the theater. As I made my way to the car, I kept seeing Sarah's vacant eyes in my head, and a hate that I had buried away came rushing back to the surface. I pulled out my flip phone and found my contact for St. Mary's Hospital. A nurse answered, and I asked if she could put me through to an administrator. As I waited for the administrator, a thought came to mind that I just had to say out loud. So, as children pass by with their parents, I said, "Mr. Ruggles can go to hell."